Hey everyone, welcome to another Bona webinar. My name is Todd Schutte with the Bona e-learning team.
And I'm Dee Linston with the tech and training team.
Today we're going to go over recoating for you guys. So we've got three different systems. We've got Bona Prep and Diamonds, we've got the Guaranteed Bona Recoat System, and we've got a hybrid system that we've come up with to help you guys on hand scraped and wire brushed floors. And hopefully everybody's taking advantage of this. One thing that we really want to ask you guys is, you know, you've got this group of happy customers that you've done sand and finish for or install sand and finish. So hopefully they're already really happy with your work. They trust you as the hardwood floor expert. But are you going back and trying to mine that customer base for recoats, right? Of course, there's a risk and reward, but it's one of the most profitable things you can do if you know how to minimize your risks. So that's what we're going to go through today. We hope that's what you guys get out of this. But let's go and just talk about some things first. So Dee, you know, with the feedback from the schools, with the customers and stuff, when you guys get in the schools, what is the feedback when you guys get into recoating?
So typically when we first start the schools, the guys are already wanting to talk about recoat before we even get into day one of what we're going to cover in the schools. And you know, what we try to do is we try to hold the guys off, letting them know that we'll talk about that on day three. So I'd say there's a lot of curiosity. I don't think they understand the profit or the value there is in recoating versus a sand and finish floor. And some of their fears would be failure. I mean, we all know that, you know, recoating is probably the most profitable part of our business, but it's also the riskiest part of our business.
How about, do a lot of guys talk about, you know, expectations or, you know, those risks and stuff with the customer? How are they going to minimize those, or what do they talk to them about up front?
Yeah, in order to minimize the risks, it's important that they educate the consumer, educate the homeowner. You know, as we know, recoats aren't guaranteed depending on what system you're using. And so therefore, you know, if they don't discuss the risk up front, then if there is a failure, then it's almost like a contractor's trying to back out of that situation versus had they discussed it up front. Now the homeowners know what to expect. Yeah,
it always everything comes down to that commandment number one, right? Expectations. But then also I think important during the school is your own experience when you were a contractor with recoating, and what do you know, take across to the students with that?
Yeah, you know, being an ex-contractor, I always, you know, discuss the fact that, you know, out of 100 recoats that I've done over my years of contracting, I've probably had 2 failures. So a 98% success rate is great. But, you know, also get into the details, which we'll definitely talk about later, in, you know, why did the 2 fails, and what are some of the things you definitely have to make sure you're discussing with that consumer so that they understand that, you know, it's a recoat, it's not a complete resand, and the risks as well as the rewards.
Yeah, and just that expectation of it's not going to look like a brand new floor. You know, it's not going to take care of 100% of the dents in the floor, scratches. It's going to make everything look better, but, you know, we're talking 90-95%. They're still going to be overjoyed with, you know, the outcome on it, but
for sure,
that's an important expectation up front.
Yeah. So during your time at Bona, what changes have you seen in the recoat systems? I mean, I know it's kind of evolved from the screen and recoat, but what are some of the changes you've seen over the time since you've been at Bona?
Yeah. So 30 years ago, right, we started out, as I'm sure you remember, just screen and recoats. And then we came across the pad, you know, the Sea of Lee's pad, or the Scotch-Brite pads that 3M had at that time. So instead of screens, then we moved to padding and recoating. Then in the late 90s, we had pads and prep. Prep was introduced when pre-finished flooring became so much tougher to recoat, or really to abrade, and that's when prep was designed to actually soften the surface of that finish a little bit. And that was it for a while. Really, it was prep and recoat for quite a long time. But then as more and more people started using different cleaners on the floor, stainless steel appliances, more and more stone countertops, all these different polishes and stuff came into the system, so more and more possible contaminants on the floor. And that's when we developed the Guaranteed Recoat System. So even though it's a little more, laborious, you got to do it all the steps a couple times through to get that guarantee. It's really for fighting all those different contaminants that might be on the floor. Then we had another change with pre-finished floors where they got, again, that finish just became tougher and tougher to abrade, where even now the pads and prep weren't doing it by themselves. And that's when we worked with SIA, and they came out with the diamonds, which came from the automotive industry. But we found with using the prep and then diamonds on the really tough pre-finish, it would do a really nice job of abrading it. And we found a ton of other uses for the diamonds as well. And then with the trend, probably the last 5-7 years, with more wire brush, wider and wider planks, hand scrape, distressed. Now we have a need for this hybrid system that we came up with, because you can't put a flat abrasion system on a lot of these floors. So those are the changes that we've seen over the years, from old school screen and recoats to now a hybrid system to deal with wire brushed and distressed floors. So I want to ask you, going back to profitability, right? What do you tell guys about recoating and how profitable it can be to their business, and why they should actually be working it in?
Yeah, the profitability when it comes to recoat, I mean, it's like I say, it's probably the most profitable part of the hardwood flooring industry when it comes to, versus sand and a sand and finish. Most guys, when it comes to sand and finish, they look at that after they put an estimate together, like, okay, this is a $15,000 job, but you're not making $15,000, after you take out, material and things like that. Whereas recoat, I mean, it's mostly labor. I mean, as far as the materials are very minimum. So therefore, I mean, it's really a lot of labor dollars to be made when it comes to the recoating system. The risk reward, I mean, it's definitely something you have to, take into account, and it really comes down to educating the customers, making sure they understand that, if it comes to a ding in the floor, maybe you dropped a can of soup or a heavy pot or something, a recoat's not going to remove those things. So it's important for the consumer to understand that, in order to get some things out of the floor, a sand and finish would be necessary. But when it comes to recoat, it's less of an inconvenience to the homeowner in regards to, you don't have to take, well, I should say you definitely have to take everything off of the floor, but you're looking at more days on the job when it comes to a resand versus a recoat can be less of an inconvenience to that homeowner.
Yeah, I think it's, again, from a profitability point of view, it's important for contractors to remember that just because your machines aren't running doesn't mean you're not making money. Some guys think I need to sign up for jobs that take 3, 4, 5 days, complete install, sand and finish, or my machine's got to be running or I'm not making money. But actually the jobs that you can do quicker, so install, sand and finish, you make the least amount of money unless it's pure custom work, right? Sand and refinish, you're going to make more because you can do that job quicker. Recoating, you should make more profit even on that than the other two. And deep cleans, even more. But it takes a different mindset for all of them as well. So.
Yeah. So, what do you know, or what are you hearing about some of the, what they call no sand, no abrasion type of systems that are out there?
Yeah, there's a couple of those systems out there where there's a liquid that you put on the floor to prepare that surface. And I think they tend to chemically etch that surface. But, the most important thing with recoating first is getting that floor clean. So we don't want to skip that step. And we found that whether it's with prep, whether it's with diamonds, whether it's with the guaranteed recoat system, or even the hybrid system, as we'll see, that you have to do a good job of really cleaning up that surface in order to make it look that 90 to 95% better. And there's the thing about the contaminants too. That's what would worry me most about one of the liquid only, no sanding systems, no abrasion systems, is to me it's such a positive benefit to slightly abrade that surface, not only to get it to look better, and then you're blending out minor scratches, scuffs, wear patterns, all that kind of stuff, but also if I'm just taking off that very top layer of finish, then I'm also helping remove those contaminants, which again, I'm not sure is happening, or not to the same degree on the liquid only systems. And as far as there being dust, which is what those systems tout, dust-free, when you're hooked up to, just the Flexi Sand and your DCS backvac, there's no dust anyway. So we know that we can do our jobs 100% dust-free as well, but I think we're also doing a much better job cleaning up that surface and removing contamination by putting in an abrasion factor. Other benefits of recoating.
So when it comes to recoating, I mean, it's a way of extending the life of that floor, because you're no longer, taking, say, a layer of wood off, although it's, minimum amount when it comes to the resand if a guy's doing it right. So by keeping up with the recoat, it allows you to, just to put another protective layer on, which now you're not affecting the actual wood itself. It's a lot faster. So as I mentioned, there's no, you're not going to inconvenience the homeowner by having to be in the house for multiple days. Recoat typically, 2,000 square foot, you can probably get done in a half a day, depending on what system you're using. So it's definitely a lot faster. And it keeps the floor looking good. We know that sometimes there's just a lot of surface scratches that the consumers are more concerned with. And so a recoat will definitely take care of that, whereas some guys will go in and automatically want to talk about a resand. I mean, a recoat, it's more profitable for the contractor, and it's less of an inconvenience to the homeowner, especially when they don't need a complete resand.
Right, and like you said, I think a really important point is it preserves the life of their floor. I mean, every time you sand that floor, you're taking it one step closer to having to rip it out.
For sure.
So.
All right, so at this point, we're going to move into our demonstrations, and we'll get changed up, and we'll show some of the different systems that are out there. I should say Bona systems that are out there, and we'll get changed and do that. Alrighty, so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the steps in the Bona Prep and Recoat system using the diamonds. And the first thing you're going to want to do is make sure your floor is free of any debris. So you want to vacuum the floor really well, maybe even dry tack it, just to make sure that you have a nice clean floor. And after you clean the floor, now you're going to get into the deep clean portion of this process. And part of that is going to be using the Bona Prep along with the maroon pads. And that deep clean portion is really just to get a good scrub on the floor. And while you're deep cleaning that floor, you're going to want to make sure you tack the floor using a Bona microfiber pad along with the Bona Prep. And what that does is, from the deep cleaning portion of this process, you're going to want to get that slurry up right away. So, whether you're working a room at a time or how big of a section of work is going to depend on how fast that slurry is drying on the floor. So, if you're working by yourself, you're going to work smaller sections, of course, that way you have an opportunity to clean that slurry up. But if you have a partner that you're working with, he or she will be able to get right behind you after you finish the deep scrub and clean that slurry up. That'll take anywhere from maybe 20, 30 minutes to dry, and then you can go back and now start the abrasion process. And one other thing I didn't mention, you're going to use the flat Bona drive plate instead of the multi-disc, although you'll see some 5-inch discs here. We'll get into discussing that. But a nice flat drive plate along with 1 or 2 of the conditioning pads. Now, stacking them will just give you a little bit more cushion during that deep clean phase, but a single one will work just as well. What you want to be cautious of is taking anything off of the floor in regards to most of the finish, and you start taking color off of the floor if it is a stained floor. So after the deep clean, and then you're tacking with prep just to get up any slurry, then you're going to move into the abrasion phase. And with the abrasion phase, you definitely want to have multiple conditioning pads, or you can use a 1-inch white pad to drive the conditioning pad. Here, what we're going to do, we added 3 diamonds. The grit choice, it's going to depend on how aggressive you need to be, but 240 is probably the best, or I should say the least aggressive. And how many you add on the pad is also going to determine how aggressive you need to be. The prep is softening the existing finish, so therefore you don't need to be too aggressive. So I would definitely start out with maybe 2, 3, and maybe not add any more. Otherwise, it'll be like having a multi-disc, which we don't want on this floor, because that will tend to be too aggressive. You could start to burn through the finish. For around the perimeter, you're going to use the same steps. What we did is we took the conditioning pad and cut it in the size of our hand sand block.
so that you'd want to do the same thing around the perimeter, get it nice and clean. It's not important that you go over it twice, but you do want to use the system the way you would in the field, just that you're marrying everything up. And when you get into the abrasion phase, you're going to want to use a DCS vacuum along with your DCS buffer, because although you shouldn't have much dust because you soften the finish, if you have any dust, using a dust containment system will allow you to be able to pick that dust up into your system. And then you tack the floor one more time using a tack rag and some clean Bona Prep, and that way it just continues to soften the floor to give you a nice chemical bond along with the mechanical bond that you use from the abrasion process. So that's our steps, and what we'll do now is set up and get everything ready so we can actually go through the process. All right, I asked Bobby to join me for this demonstration, so he'll be working with me throughout this process.
So the first step we're going to do is we're going to abrade the edges first before D comes in behind me. And the purpose of that is I'm not going to be into the solution. So I'm going to go in and first do the edges with just the maroon pad on the block. And then he's going to follow it behind me. And we're just going to work our way into the next room.
All right, so Bob and I are now going to do the hybrid system on this wire brushed floor. Very, very similar to just the straightforward prep system, except now instead of using diamonds, because now we're dealing with a floor that has, you know, multiple levels that we've got to clean and abrade. We're going to switch in the abrasive brush. So this is a 120 grit equivalent abrasive brush from the Guaranteed Recoat System. And don't cross those over. So if you've been using this for your Guaranteed Recoat System, it's probably contaminated. So I would have a separate set of brushes. In fact, usually I have one wet and one dry for this hybrid system, as you'll see what we're going to do. So again, mimicking the prep system, first we're going to vacuum. Then we're going to do a prep and deep clean with the brush on the buffer. On the sides, though, what we're going to do is, again, because we've got multiple levels, and these types of floors tend to get a lot dirtier than a nice flat floor. Because again, people are using flat cleaning instruments on them, and it doesn't tend to get down into those little nooks and crannies as well as something that has a little more depth to it. So on the sides, we'll use prep, we'll spray it, we'll scrub it with the brush, and then we'll mop that up behind us just with a dampened cloth as we go. And usually what we'll do is we'll work a whole section together around the outside, get that all cleaned, then we'll come in with the brush and the prep in the middle for the main field, just so we're not getting in each other's way and stuff. And that's also one of the details. We want to make sure that we get the edges just as clean as the middle. So we'll come in, do the prep deep clean with the brush. Now, because that stuff, again, it's sitting down in the grain and down in that texture, we're not going to come in and just tack it, again, with something flat. Now we're going to use the power scrubber. I've just got deep clean in this. If this was a pre-finished floor, then I would use prep in my power scrubber as well. Just like in the regular prep system, you also tack with prep, but when we're using it on something that's site finished, water-based, little contamination, I know I've got really good adhesion results. I don't feel the need to use prep also in the power scrubber. So deep clean, power scrub to get that all out of there, wait for that to dry. Then we'll come back with my dry brush for the dry abrasion, again on the buffer and then with the back, so we have dustless. And then you've got a choice. I can either come back now with the Tampico brush, because again, I've got that real fine dust sitting down in that soft grain. I want to make sure I clean that all out and don't just coat over it. So I can clean that out with the Tampico brush on my buffer with the back, or I can come back again with the power scrubber. And that will do a really great job also of cleaning that stuff all out of the grain. And also if you've got some bevels, you know, this one has some decent little micro bevels on the side just to give it more of that plank feel. But those are also places that dirt, hair, dust, grime, and even my abrasion process is going to put stuff down in those seams that I want to make sure I get cleaned out. So we'll come back and clean it. We may do a final tacking just on top, as a last step, then we'll be good to coat. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get going with the vacuum. All right, so one quick note, work in sections small enough so you can get back to, especially when you're doing the deep clean phase, so I can get back to it while it's still wet. If your floor is really dirty and this starts drying, that dirty residue is going to get locked onto the floor. So whether it's just your tacking with the regular prep system or using the power scrubber, Just work in sections small enough, like I said, so you can get back to it while it's still wet. The dirtier the floor is, probably the smaller the sections you're gonna have to work. All right?
So now that I buffed the field, I'm gonna go around the edge of the perimeter with the 240 diamond on a block, just to make sure we get that little bit of the area that the buffer didn't reach. All right, now that we're done our braiding, we're gonna clean the floor with the Tampico brush. We could do this with the power scrubber as well, but we just wanna make sure we get all that fine dust out of the soft grain.
So now we're going to go over the Guaranteed Recoat System. We'll talk about the process and then we'll demonstrate the process. As with any of the recoat systems, you want to make sure that the floor is thoroughly clean. So vacuuming, tacking, whatever it takes to minimize how much debris is being left on the floor. And then part of the process, first step, you're going to want to roll out the Bona remover. So here we have the Bona remover. There's abrasive grit in there. And so by rolling this out and then buffing it in with the special drive plate, which has abrasive grit on it as well, you'll buff in the Bona remover, and then you'll want to take that up using a Bona power scrubber as well as the Bona rinse. So first step would be roll out the remover, buff it in using a Bona drive plate. You'll also want to remove your brush skirt because this is a messier process. So you definitely want to make sure your brush skirt is not on your buffer while you're buffing in the remover. And then once the remover is buffed in, you have two choices when it comes to hitting the perimeter. So either you're going to use what we have here is a hand sand block, 120 grit paper, or maroon conditioning pad. And when you do the perimeter, you only have to do that once. So you want to make sure you get a nice scrub around the perimeter. That way you're helping to clean up any contaminants that may be around the perimeter of the room. So you can do that before, which is what we'll do in this scenario. We'll go ahead and have Bobby hit the perimeter first, and then we'll roll out the remover and get it buffed in. After you do your first, what we call deep clean with the Bona remover and the abrasive brush, then we're gonna have to rinse all of that product off. Two things you wanna keep in mind is the longer you leave that remover sitting on the floor and the drier it gets,
the harder it is going to be to remove it with the Bona wrench. So depending on how big of a job you're working, how big of a section you're working, you definitely want to make sure you get the power scrubber in so that you're able to remove the remover. And then you'll have to repeat that step a second time. That's the only way we can guarantee it, is to make sure the step is being done twice, as far as putting the remover down and buffing that remover in. You don't have to go around the perimeter a second time with your hand sand block. Just one time is good enough. And so then after you repeat the steps again, then you would go back and do one final rinse over the whole floor using the Bona power scrubber. When using the Bona power scrubber, for deep cleaning, you would normally use the white brushes, but when it comes to the Bona remover, you'll want to use the red brushes. The red brushes are a lot stiffer, therefore it's really going to help with the agitation of the Bona remover as it's been scrubbed in with a drive plate that has abrasive grit on there. A stiffer brush is really going to give you good agitation as well, as you're scrubbing the floor and removing the remover. Okay, so we just completed the first step of the guaranteed recoat system process. You will have to repeat that step with the exception of having to go around the perimeter with the hand sand block. So you'd want to make sure you completely remove all the remover from the floor with this final pass with the power scrubber. That way you're not leaving any Bona remover on the floor.
All right, everyone, so we got all of our floors prepared the correct way, whether it was with just Prep and Diamonds, the Guaranteed Bona Recoat System, or the Hybrid System using the abrasive brush and Prep. And that's really half the battle, right? In doing a proper recoat, the first thing is we got to get the surface prepared correctly, clean, because we don't want to be just coating over everybody's dirt and grit and everything else. And then we're also going to use one of the Traffic brands of product, either regular Traffic, Traffic HD, or Traffic Naturel you could use. And the reason why is because we know that they adhere the best. They're going to give us the best adhesion, the best chance of, again, success in having a good recoat. You could recoat with Mega, you could recoat with oil modified poly. You could recoat with whatever you want, but our intention is always to do best practices. So again, best practice in choosing what recoat system we want, definitely best practice in what finish we're going to put over the top, because shame to put all this work in on getting a really nice surface to recoat and then chancing it on a finish that might not be as good as one of the traffic products. So let's get to coating.
After allowing the floors to sit overnight, we've now come back to take a look at the results as well as discuss the 3 different type of recoat systems we used on the 3 different panels. On this particular panel, we decided to go with the Bona Prep and Diamonds because it's a flat floor and the level of contamination was really minimum. After talking to the homeowner about the maintenance products that were used on this floor, we realized that she's sticking to a nice maintenance program, and we feel that the Bona Prep and Diamond would be best for this particular floor. Moving on to our next panel, the level of contamination was a little bit higher. After talking to the homeowners, we realized that they were using a lot of different maintenance products, so therefore we went with the Guaranteed Recoat System.
Yeah, so from talking to the homeowner, we found out that they had used polish on the floor, they'd used oil soap on the floor, plus they've got a ton of stainless steel appliances. They showed us the polish that they use on that, as well as on their granite countertops. So we knew we had a lot of different contaminants on this floor. And even though it's a nice 5-inch solid oak flooring, from looking in the air vents and stuff, we knew we didn't have enough to sand if it came down to that. So definitely moved to the Guaranteed Recoat System on this because we knew, 1, we had a lot of contaminants, 2, we didn't have room for any failures because this floor can't be sanded again. So when we move over then to this floor, and now we've got our wire brushed floor. So we know we didn't want to use a flat abrasion system on it, so the hybrid system came in perfect. We had very low level of contamination, so that also made prep a good choice. Now, if we knew we had a lot of contaminants on this floor, we could have also used the Guaranteed system on a floor like this because it also does not have any flat abrasion within that process. So, but because of the low contamination, because we're trying to maintain the look and feel of that wire brush feature in this floor, we used the hybrid system, we rolled on the finish, we maintained that look and feel of that wire brush texture in the floor, and so all of our floors came out great just because of talking to the homeowners again about maintenance, contamination, knowing the life of the floor, if it could possibly stand another sand and refinish, if that's what it came down to, or knowing that we had some textures in the floor that we wanted to maintain as well. So that's again kind of how you go through the 3 systems, talk to the homeowner about the floor a little bit, give them an education, hopefully have successful recoats. So now we're going to switch on over to frequently asked questions that come up in the sand and finish schools. So we hope you got a lot out of the demonstrations of looking at the 3 different systems, Prep and Diamonds, Bona Guaranteed Recoat System, and then the hybrid system when you're dealing with really wire brushed, hand scraped floors that you think are pretty safe, where you don't have to use the Guaranteed system on them. Now we want to go to frequently asked questions. What are some of the things that come up during the school that, it's churning in the back of somebody's mind. They're dying to ask Dee or Rob or any of the other tech and training team that's there, about the recoating system and how I can work it into my business. So the first question, of course, that comes up is, how do I choose between Prep and Diamonds, Guaranteed Recoat, Hybrid System? How do I choose and make that offering to my customer?
Sure. The first thing you want to look at, or at least talk to the customer about, is how much contamination may be on the floor in regards to what type of maintenance products they're using, and things of that nature, or how flat the floor is. I mean, if, as Todd mentioned, you have hand scraped, micro beveled, floors that aren't really flat, have a lot of undulation to them. At that point, you want to consider, either the Guaranteed Recoat System or the Hybrid System that was demonstrated. If you know the customer and they've only been using maybe the Bona cleaner, and you really feel good about what they've been using on the floor, again, it's going to be a risk, but you're trusting what they're telling you, and therefore maybe just the diamond and recoat would be good. So I know a lot of guys, when it comes to the high-end homes, they'll tend to always want to push the Guaranteed Recoat System, especially if it's a flat floor, because when it comes to a failure, the only way you're going to be able to take care of that is a resand. So, some guys will use the guarantee system all the time. Guys will depend on the level of contamination. They may want to consider the diamond and recoat, and then you'll have the hybrid system also, which we demonstrated.
Yeah, I think if you look at it, the guy needs to go through his time as well, right? Because we know Guaranteed Recoat System is going to take the most time, but it's also the safest. And then if you think you have a relatively safe floor, then if it's flat or relatively flat, then you can go with regular Prep and Diamonds. Unflat or wire brush, something that has some contour to it, then we're looking at hybrid system. Another factor that may come into play is also, is it a historic floor where we don't want to risk having to sand it because, it's got 100 years of charm built into it, and you don't want to take that away. So there again, we're probably going to Guaranteed Recoat System, because I just don't want to risk that it's going to be peeling and we're going to have to come back and sand that floor. So there's definitely some thought that goes in behind thinking about all three of those and what do I offer to my customer. But just know that you've got three choices, not just one, and some of the different variables that may play into that.
And as you mentioned with the historic floors, I mean, the same holds true when it comes to hand scraped, distressed. I mean, because once you have to sand that floor, now you got to consider, are you going to be able to give them another hand scraped or distressed floor? And also you have some of these engineered products that don't have enough wear layer on them for you to be able to resand those floors. So that's something you have to take into consideration too. So, I would say the safest bet is probably the Guaranteed Recoat System, if you know what type of floor it is, and if you know you can't resand it. Otherwise, you're taking a huge risk on the other systems if it doesn't work. Yeah.
I think a couple things you said there leads us into our next question about expectations. And I know, again, that comes up at the schools is the guys ask, how do I handle my customers' expectations? What do I talk to them about?
Yeah, so one thing that we have in the school books and we discuss with the guy is you definitely want to educate the consumer in the beginning. I mean, when you're doing that estimate. And we have a little, it's not really a contract, but it's a little clause, or say disclaimer, I guess is the best way to put it, where it talks about that you're going to follow the manufacturer's recommendation on the three systems the systems that we talked about. And although the only one that's guaranteed is a Guaranteed Recoat System, if there is a failure, you want to work out something that you're willing to do, as a good faith gesture. What happens is that, a consumer is not going to want to take the chance on a recoat, and then if it fails, and now you're going to charge them full price for a resand. So some guys will be willing to maybe knock a little bit off of the resand if there is a point where they need to resand it due to the failure. But education is key.
Yeah, so all great points, Dee, which leads us to our next question. What happens if I have a failure?
Yeah, well, if you have a failure, there's no systems out there that's going, and the failure is typically the product is going to peel, or I should say the finish is going to peel. Once the finish starts to peel, there's no other way around it but to resand that floor. And hopefully, if it's not an engineered or some thin veneer, you'd probably have to replace that floor. So by educating that consumer up front that if they're willing to take a chance on the recoat systems, hopefully the guaranteed recoat system will be the way to go, but you have to resand that floor. There's no systems out there that's going to take all the peelings up. You know, some guys will take a chance on screening or aggressively abrading the floor in hopes that they can remove all the finish that may be peeling, but you never know if you get it all. So therefore, by putting another coat over something that you tried to work hard at getting all those peelings up, you just never know if you're going to have spot contaminations down the line. So really the only guarantee when you have a failure is going to be a resand.
Yeah, and I think it's just understanding how things stick, right? And we'll go over that in another one of the webinars, but like Dee said, that's why it's important on the expectation side that you talk to the homeowner about what the possibilities are. You ask a lot of questions about their maintenance coats, not just on the floor, but also up above. You do a test area, as we talked about before we did the demonstrations. You talk to them about the results in that test area and what you're seeing. And you've got to know exactly what you're dealing with as far as the floor. Like you said, is it engineered? Even if it is, can I sand it? Or even if it's solid, does it have any sandings left in it? Or is the historic floor? You know, you've got to know exactly what you're dealing with. In case, you got to go to plan B. D, and another thing that always comes up in the schools is guys that say, you know, I don't do recoats at all, and they're too scary. I just tell them I have to sand and finish it. Well, what's the discussion there then in the schools?
Man, if I ever had to go back out and start doing floors again, I would try to pride my business on just recoating. I mean, as we talked about earlier, it's the most profitable part of this business. There's really a lot less work in regards to, I mean, it's a lot of labor dollars, as we explained. So I definitely wouldn't ignore it. I mean, some guys will set their business up to where, you know, kind of dating myself when I say I used to have just an Excel sheet that had all my customers on there. Now guys, you know, have sophisticated systems to where they know their, what do you call it, CRM type deal, to where they can go back and start reaching out to some of their old customers in hopes to get that recoat business. If you were the one who actually sand and finish that floor, education is key when it comes to letting them know how to maintain that floor so that you can go back and get that recoat business. So I would say that you definitely don't want to walk away from a recoat unless you just are nervous about the risk. But I would say you definitely want to implement recoating into your, you know, sand and finish business because, as we talked about, it is the most profitable part of this business.
Yeah. I also think recoating, right, makes you more of a professional because when I go in and do a sand and refinish or an install sand and finish, there's an important part that a lot of guys skip at the end is teaching your customer how to take care of the floor. If I do that and teach them how not to contaminate it, now I'm setting myself up for success than for recoats. If I don't educate them and just let them use whatever, then I'm going to run into a lot of contamination issues.
Yeah, and you know, there's a lot of floors out there that, you know, as a contractor, I may not have installed sand and finish. So therefore, you know, I can see guys really looking at the risk of just walking into a house and maybe that homeowner just purchased that house so they don't know what's been on that floor. But with the guaranteed recoat system, it'll take off any contaminant as long as there's a successful coat of urethane on that floor. But yeah, you know, just to go out and just start recoating any floor, I mean, can be a huge risk. But if you do your homework, as Todd had mentioned, and you know, try to figure out how much wear layer and what kind of contaminants are on that floor, then you'll have a really good chance of having that 98% success rate that I had mentioned earlier.
So Dee, you mentioned a couple things there. One is guys only doing recoating, which we know there are some guys like that in the industry. Not only because they know it's really profitable, but also because, you know, they're later on in their career and they want to get off their knees. Install sand and finish is very difficult on your body. So it's also a way that guys could back off, you know, as they get into those later years and still be in the industry, still make good money doing it, but not get beat up so much. And then the other thing is historical floors and only restoring those. I mean, there's a lot of floors throughout the country that are 100, 150, 200 years old, right? And you don't want to sand those. They want to maintain the character, all the marks that have been in that floor over the last however many hundreds of years, and maintain those. Those guys have a very specialized skill and can really make a lot of money doing what they're doing. So, and it also makes you more of a professional with your homeowner. right? Because it's going to force you to talk to them about the right way to take care of their floors and the importance or the cost difference between if you screw this floor up and contaminate it, now I got to come back and sand it, this is what it's going to cost, or you take care of it with the right stuff, and now I can probably just come in and do a prep and recoat, and you have a much more sustainable solution. So the next question that comes up then is, okay, I got all these contaminants. What are the most common sources of contamination on the floor?
Yeah, when it comes to contamination, or even when it comes to educating the homeowners on what to clean their floors with, most cleaners that make the floor shinier is probably leaving something on the floor. So therefore, you definitely want to get into talking about all the different cleaning products that may have been used on that floor. But not only on the floor, you also want to consider, what they're cleaning their countertops with, what they're cleaning their furniture with, because all that overspray over time will get on the floor and then will be tracked throughout the home or throughout the floor. So therefore, now you have contaminants, which can lead to maybe spot contamination or maybe even just the whole area contaminated due to the overspray of whether it be, furniture cleaner, countertop cleaner, stainless steel cleaner. I mean, there's just so many different cleaners out there that you really want to make sure you're having that discussion with the homeowner so that you can determine, what the level of contamination is when it comes to choosing what system you may want to use.
Yep. Another one, and it seems to have died off a little bit, but for a while there were people having problems because they were especially cleaning their Bona mop covers with dryer sheets, right? We say no dryer sheets, no bleach, and the stuff that's on those dryer sheets was actually making their floors slippery, and if guys were trying to do recoating, it was causing recoating issues. That seems to have gone away, but I'm sure it still rears its ugly head once in a while.
Sure. And we pride ourselves on the cleaner that we make because we know that our cleaner is just going to maintain whatever shine they have. So it really is important for the contractor to educate the homeowner on the right cleaner to choose, because choosing the right cleaner is something that's not going to make their floor shiny, or if it's doing that, it's going to be leaving something on the floor. So that's important.
All right, that's all the time we've got for questions. When you do have some more time, make sure you check out some more of our e-learning videos on the Bona Professional YouTube channel.
If you go to our website, you'll find the registrations for our 3-day sand and finish school. Also, you may want to check out the podcast On the Floor with Wayne and Rob. And also, if you have any additional questions, maybe after hours or anytime you're thinking of a question, you can always send in an email to ustech@bona.com, or you can always give us a call from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time at 1-800-872-5515 and ask for the Tech and Training Department.
Thanks everyone for joining in. Look forward to seeing you at the next webinar.